Okay, I think we should get started. There may be a few more coming, but hopefully they'll come in quietly. So, very warm welcome to the first in our series with Departments of Public Policy and Computer Science of a joint program of seminars to try and, let's say, get the discussion going and some collaborations going between our two departments. I feel there's a lot that we can do together, and it will be of great interest in influencing the way things are done in the country, but also particularly in thinking about ways in which we can improve social situations. And with that in mind, I think I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker for this series, and a distinguished lecture in this case, Professor Rayid, who has a very interesting background. Having spent some time at CMU, he then worked in industry with Accenture for a number of years before deciding that he really needed to actually get out of that and do something worthwhile.
I call it something useful.
And quit his job, and literally, I think, the next week got a phone call from the Obama campaign whether he might be prepared to help them with his re-election. And indeed, he then led the data science team that was behind a lot of the targeting of information and support for Obama's re-election. So I hope you would agree that was a worthwhile thing to do. I certainly do. After that, he's continued that vein and come back to university life at the University of Chicago, where he's heading up a lot of work that's going on in this area of linking data science and public policy. He works at the Center for Data Science and Public Policy. He's also been running a summer program in Data Science for Good, or for Social Good, which is bringing together people with an interest in both data science and social issues, and focusing them on projects, concrete projects, that will bring the benefits of data science to bear on real-world problems of social interest. And I think we may hear, I'm not sure, a little bit about some of those. Certainly when I've heard about them in the past, it's been very exciting stuff. So it's really with delight that I can hand over to Rayid for his lecture.
Thank you, John. Thanks. So what I could talk about today is work that's been going on around, giving you lots of examples on what public policy can use from data science, and how data science can actually be useful beyond making you click on ads and selling you things you don't probably want, and trade better and faster and all those different things. And when I talk about public policy, so I think about less of the macro public policy, more micro public policy, because that's kind of where data helps you in some ways. With all the examples we see with data, I think that the underlying key is data allows you to do personalization at a large scale, and if you can do that for commerce and friend suggestions in Facebook and trading, you can do that for policy problems. So what I'd like to do is kind of spend some time on giving you lots and lots of depressing stories, because how can we talk about public policy without getting depressed? And especially in certain countries, including the States. So I'll start with lots of depressing stories, and then I'll sort of try to talk about how we can make them slightly less depressing. And feel free to, I'll do a lot of, I'll go breath first. And I'll mostly stop at, the first layer. So if you want to go deeper, ask me questions on any of those, and I can go deeper. And there's also more content behind papers and more details. I can point you to those things as well. Everything I'm going to talk about is work that's done with probably about a couple hundred people. So I won't put all their names up there, but everything I'm talking about there is something more that's at least open source code on GitHub. So you can go check that out. let's start with some depressing stories. Depressing story number one is Fort Lauderdale Police Department. So it's very timely. So the first depressing story is, yeah, first depressing story in the States is police misconduct. You've probably heard about it, hopefully heard about it, unfortunately heard about it. The problem is it's right now about 50 cities in the U.S. where the Department of Justice has basically investigated the police department for some sort of misconduct, and they've come to something that's called a consent decree, which means they're telling the police department to fix themselves, and they have a set of things they need to fix. Now, the issues we've heard about are all pretty depressing, but I think the worst thing is that most of these large police departments have a system installed, which they call early intervention system. And what it's supposed to do is flag when an officer is likely to be at risk of one of these, doing one of these stupid things. And the way they've built the system is it's pretty bad. Usually it's done in the classic public policy way, where you have three really smart people sitting around a table thinking of how to build the system. What could be predicted? Well, number one, what if they do a lot of bad things in the past? That's probably predicted, so let's put that down. And yeah.
Just speak up a little bit, because that's
sure.
a noisy pen.
Okay. Okay. So they built these systems called early intervention systems, and they're basically what were called threshold-based. So people come up with 2 or 3 different indicators, and one of them is how, if you've had bad things in the past, if you've had complaints about you in the past, if you take a lot of time off holidays. In the U.S., nobody takes that, so that must be a red flag. And based on those 3 things, they built a system, and that system's been around for about 10 years. And it turns out that the system, as we can see from a lot of examples, but also from data, it doesn't work. So we're working with one specific department, and it turns out that that system flagged about 60-something% of the police officers in the department. So that makes it automatically useless, because nobody trusts the system, they can't do anything about it. And even then, it only flagged about 70% of all the officers who were going to go on to do something stupid. So it's pretty close to random, right? 60-60 would have been a random system, so it's slightly better than random. But there was another problem with that. One, that it's not really predictive, right? It's basically telling you if you've done bad things in the past, you're going to do them again, which means that interventions you have are mostly punitive. All you can do is fire the person. You can't do much to fix it. It's too late. So that's depressing story number 1. I'll come back to some of the things. Depressing story number 2, again, this is in the States, which you may have heard about, Flint, Michigan, where people were drinking water from lead pipes and getting lead poisoning. And it turns out that's the media story, but the main source of lead poisoning is not water and lead pipes, it's paint in walls. So in the States, pretty much every home built before 1978 has lead paint in there. And it's fine as long as the paint stays in there. But when homes get old, paint starts chipping, comes down, children crawl, they pick up that dust, they put it in their mouth, it goes into your bloodstream, and when it goes into the bloodstream, it starts having pretty horrible effects. Motor control issues, IQ, memory. The worst of all is that all of these are irreversible. Once lead is in your bloodstream, there's nothing you can do to fix that. So what is the policy that's used today to deal with it? Well, most governments wait until somebody gets lead poisoning. They test children for their blood for lead, and if they find a high enough level, they will typically send somebody to inspect the home and check for hazards in the home. And unsurprisingly, you find that hazards when you was a kid, that's already been poisoned, so that they fix the home. So basically, the policy today is using children as sensors for lead because they're very accurate. You give them lead and their lead level goes up. It's extremely efficient for them to use this policy because every home you inspect, there's lead in there. So why would you not do that? But obviously, so it's wonderful for the kids who are going to live there in the future, for the homes. but the kid just got poisoned. It's so that's depressing story number 2. Number 3. This may sound like something coming from a different country, but this is about slightly lower than India. India right now, I think the high school, secondary school graduation rates are about 60%. In the U.S., it's slightly higher than that. But the depressing part here is also not only do students don't graduate from school or not graduate on time, there is a lot of money being spent on coming up with support programs, academic, non-academic. And it turns out that a lot of those programs are targeted at the wrong students. Often they require you opt into these programs, or the parents have to come in. So there's this mismatch in kids who need support and the kids who are getting the extra support, because schools often don't have a good idea of who these at-risk students are. And it's pretty much the same story as the police officer story, where some teachers sit around a table and think of, what if they have low grades? What if they miss school a lot? What if they have disciplinary problems? They come up with 2 or 3 of these things, and then anybody who fits that falls into one bucket. And that bucket is often too large. It misses a lot of people, and it has a lot of extra kids in there who don't need to be in there. And it's not prioritized. You just sort of get this bucket of kids, and you interview all of them, and you often cannot do that. And that number has been pretty constant for the last several years. Another story. Should have used a different font color. This is sanitation. So about 2.4 billion. That's about I think a third-ish of the world don't have access to sanitation facilities, but 1 billion people just use open outside, and several million people die every year because of those issues. At the same time, most governments in a lot of those countries aren't really doing that much in terms of policy to give incentives or to design facilities that can actually fix that problem. And that's causing a lot of issues. So when he talks about some of the things that some organizations are doing there and where data can help. Another story, Mexico. So about half the Mexican population, according to their definition, their internal definition is in poverty. And they've been doing a lot of work. So they've got this their social service organization, ministry called STEaPP. And what their job is to figure out who are the people who have needs of different kinds, whether it's health, education, employment, transportation, and try to match funds with the people who need the funds. Something they struggle with is there's two sides of that problem. One thing they struggle with is they think there are millions and millions of people who have needs but don't know that they can sign up for certain programs. And they don't know how to find them because they can't do a survey of the entire census of the entire country. And this is too expensive to ask all the different questions. The second problem they have is they know people are lying about their income. So they've got this misallocation of social service funds where they think they're giving more money to some people who don't really need it, and they're missing millions of people who need the services but don't really know that they're eligible for it, that they're available, and that they can ask for it. Let's skip that one. This is again coming back to the States, which is pretty depressing in terms of the jail system. I don't think a lot of people know here, but the U.S. is one of they keep putting people in jail over and over and over again. So there are about 11 billion people who go through there are 3,900 local jails, and what turns out it's horrible for people to go through that, obviously, but it's also bad for the people who are paying for these things in tax money. So 22 billion a year is being spent on maintaining these jails. What's sort of interesting here is that a lot of these people who are going through this jail, there are two things there. One is there are a lot of people who are awaiting trial that haven't been charged with anything. And what happens is that if somebody goes and police arrest somebody, they can put them in custody for up to 3 days until they're waiting trial. And then at that trial, they decide whether they're allowed to be given bail or not to go out until that trial. for 3 days, they possibly lose jobs because they can't go to those jobs for 3 days, and then kind of starts a downhill spiral. So there's a huge issue going on over there. And then bottom was sort of more depressing, is that a lot of these people suffer from other issues like mental illness, homelessness, substance abuse, and chronic health problems. So these are not people who are mentally stable, who are doing rational things. So that's the last depressing story I'm going to talk about. We'll come back to all of these. So what's sort of common among a lot of these stories is that they affect people. They span a lot of policy areas, pretty much most policy areas we can talk about. The workforce is often we talk about education, public health, sanitation, criminal justice, public safety, skip a couple of environmental ones. So they span a lot of policy areas, but they all have a lot of data behind each of these problems that governments have been collecting for years and years and years, for different reasons. And today, very little of that data is being used to do anything. So there are people on the front lines, in the field, who are taking some action about all of these different things. There are guidance counselors, there are programs in schools that are being targeted at kids to help them stay in school. There are home inspectors that are going to do the lead poisoning inspections that are fixing the homes. There are all of these programs, mental health facilities, emergency rooms, homeless shelters, have caseworkers who are dealing with these people who are going to go on and spend all this time in jail. So all of these people are taking some action today. And that action is rarely supported by any sort of data, by any sort of information that could help them. And a lot of these things end up being reactive instead of proactive. Right? So all these people, if before taking that action, if they knew the right people to take that action with, that might make things a little bit better. It doesn't mean that they can solve all the problems that we're talking about, but having a much more data-driven approach would help them be slightly more effective and hopefully significantly more efficient. And they can use their resources to improve the outcomes that they actually care about. Right? So let's go through some of these examples again. This one. So this, looking at the existing, so this is some work we started about a year ago working with a couple of different police departments in the States. And we got their data, and the data was everything they had about police officers. So anything to do with demographics and history, all the arrests, every stop they make, every citation, every complaint against them, every time they used force, every time it was investigated, whether it was sustained or not sustained, whether it was excessive use of force, whether it wasn't, whether the complaint was justified, not unjustified. But that's just about 10 years of data for every police officer in a few departments. And then the first thing we did was evaluate the old system. And it turned out, as I mentioned, that it was completely useless. It was slightly better than random, which meant that nobody trusted it and nobody was really taking any actions based on that. And so the first thing we did was, well, how can we build a very simple system that could do better? And we took all this data and built a very simple machine learning system that took all that and predicted which officers are at risk of one of these behaviors in the next 12 months. And the idea was if we can, they already have an existing system. When it raises a flag, you can use to intervene. And the intervention can be training, counseling, getting them off the street, all of those things. And it turns out that the very simple system, through a few months of work, we were able to cut down that, instead of flagging half the officers, we were able to cut down the false positive rate by about 50%. So we were about half as raising false positives about half the time. And we're able to go and find about 15 to 20% more officers who were going to go on to have these adverse incidents. And those were the two metrics that we cared about. We wanted to reduce the false positives so that people can actually trust the system and increase the number of people we're trying to find. So the interesting thing we found there was, obviously, anytime you do this type of work, the best predictors of the future are the past behaviors. Right? So it's true that officers who have a history of those things end up doing it again. But then you start finding slightly more subtle indicators. So two of the characteristics we found, One was if an officer has responded to a lot of domestic abuse incidents, that increased their probability of having one of these adverse incidents. The second one was if an officer has responded to a lot of suicide attempt calls, that increased the probability of them.
I assume officers can't choose what goes to it.
No, they're so I'll mention in 2 minutes how that connects to what I'm talking about. Officers. So those two, as you can imagine, are we just looked at that and found police officers. Yeah, those are high stress indicators. So there are people, you can imagine there are officers who are possibly bad officers, and you can find them pretty easily and you can do some certain things with them. But then there's this large number of officers that are sort of under situational stress, where they've gone involved in these things and they need support and training and counseling. And so these type of interventions that the police departments already have in place can now be targeted towards these officers. So that system is now being piloted, and some the Charlotte, Mecklenburg, which is North Carolina, in these states, they are implementing the system to test it. One of the things we actually found was that, so this is predicting sort of year out, right, because that's what they were interested in seeing, if we can do year out, and we can start targeting interventions with them, we have enough time to try to change their behavior. The second thing we looked at was, what if you could do a dispatch level prediction? So an emergency call comes in, and there's a dispatch person sitting there who's looking at who's the nearest officer available to respond to that call. So they don't choose it, but the dispatch person says, oh, there's an officer 2 minutes away. But what if we could predict this officer is 84% at risk of one of these incidents in that dispatch? And there's another officer that's 6 minutes away, but is only 10% at risk. If that call is not that urgent, that 4 minutes won't make a difference, then you can start sending that other officer over there with a much reduced risk, because it may be that they've had a different past 24 hours, 48 hours, 2 weeks. So that's something we're trying to test right now. That's a much harder problem because you've only got 0.00001% of dispatches that actually result in one of these incidents. So it's much harder to get right. But all we're looking for here is relative order. As long as we can rank the dispatches correctly, we can now give this dispatch person more information to figure out the right thing to do at that time. Yeah.
In a lot of these systems, when they're being tried in practice, I've been interviewing people who are using and procuring geospatial policing systems. And one major criticism that some people are doing for building their own systems is saying is they're not being prepared like for like. So a lot of the time, systems like Protocol are being put into forces that have very poor analytics capacity. Yeah. And then you say, hey, look at those great results, they're reducing crime. But before you were just sort of throwing a dartboard at the wall. In this situation, how do you prevent saying, hey, let's build this really complicated system where we're trying to assess risk on the fly, compared to saying maybe the police force doesn't have a very good counseling system. So maybe that's the root cause of this problem.
Yeah, so you're, I think the problem, well, one, Predpol and this are very different problems. In Predpol, the intervention, I have no idea. I don't know any police department has a good intervention for a Predpol system, right? It'll tell you at some block level and time span something's going to happen, but what do you do about it? You can't, it's not as simple as sending a police officer over there or intervening. So I think the difference here is that the interventions are, so for the first step, we're assuming interventions work, that they're not being targeted correctly. But that's a hypothesis. Nobody knows that these interventions work because, one, they haven't been tested, most likely. But so the intervention that works really well is taking them off the street. We know that will stop the problem because if they're not out there, they can't do anything. So at least one intervention we know works. Now the counseling and the training one, we don't know if it works. But without this, all you will get if you test an intervention is some sort of average intervention effect. Right? Where on average, on police officers in the entire department, it works at some level of effectiveness. What you really care about is, does it work on the officers that are at high risk? So you have to do both. You can't just work on the intervention without finding high-risk officers. You can't just work on the high-risk officers without coming up with an intervention that works for them. So it needs to be coupled together, and this is really the first step. This is just an identification. The second step is to then test the intervention and see do they work on these officers? And we've seen sort of some cases of, one of the challenges in a lot of this work when we talk about is the intervention data is very limited. Most of the time it's not captured. So you have to infer intervention data. For example, one of the things we see is you start seeing people and they have a high risk or high risk or high risk group. All of a sudden, the risk score after a few months goes down. What happened here? And look at them, they had 0 arrests in the past 3 months. They were still employed, but they had 0 dispatches, they had 0 arrests. Oh, they must have been taken off the street and put on the desk, so-called desk duty. And you talk to them and say, oh yeah, that's what happened. So they didn't record that as an intervention, but that was the intervention that they tried. Now, the counseling ones are still not being stored, so that's one thing we're trying to do is make sure that they're coupled.
Also at general level, rather than a specific targeted counselling, maybe these correlations were existing due to a structural factor of the police force that would be a more effective intervention than a data science-based.
Absolutely. So my claim is not that this is the best way to solve this problem. My claim is that if you were using interventions today, the best way to target them is a data-driven approach. I'm not saying that's the best way to fix it. You could systematically change the entire country, the population, the police officers, the police departments, and that would probably be a better fix because it will structurally fix the problems that exist. So this is not going to fix the real problem. This is almost just to fill the gap until the real problems can be fixed. Because you can't continuously take people out. It makes people a little bit more accountable, and so people might trust a little bit more. But it's not going to fix, if there are actual racism issues underneath, then this is not going to fix that problem. This might highlight it, this might give more evidence for it. So I'm not claiming at all any of the problems I talk about that this is the best way to solve that problem, because I don't think it is. I think it's a start to start understanding the problem better and starting to do small fixes, and we'll go from there.
Do the police officers know that we're deemed to be high risk, and if so, does it affect their behaviour?
So, yeah, and there are several questions like that we don't know the answers to because we haven't tried this. So this is just being tried now. One of the things that's happened is, in this specific case, when we first started working with our first department, we were supposed to get this data, but the data agreement had to go in front of the city council for a vote. The police officers found out. So they told the police department chief that there's no way that's going to happen, and we'll block the vote. And so we have to go and talk to the police officers and explain what we're doing. No one's actually understood what we're trying to do. Because unlike a completely new system, there's already a system that is broken, that is giving wrong predictions and unfairly flagging police officers. So when they realize what we're trying to do, like, oh yeah, this would be really great, and they started giving us ideas about what to improve and not to improve. And then from that point onwards, we've always had sort of this focus group with the police officers that we work with them. The challenge happened in some of these more advanced things when we started to change the process. So the dispatch stuff is interesting. Because no police officer, at least what we've heard, is that they're not gonna, if you tell them you're too stressed, they're not gonna take that very well. Like, no, I can do it. And so you can't just take them off the street because they're stressed. So how do you design the interventions? How do you convey the interventions so that it doesn't, so that it's actually effective? We haven't quite figured that out yet, but that's something we're working with the police department to figure out whether that's really good. There are also a lot of other issues here. Right? The assumption here is that we've got the historical data about every investigation being fair, and that if somebody complains, it's going to be investigated, and people will then, the outcome will be correct. Some departments may not have that system in place. They might not have a fair investigation process, so we're going to do that. And it's something we're trying to do is to test this with what if we had really bad data on complaints that are sustained versus not sustained, and how much does the system suffer? Can you go in and build something that can be more robust? But Stuart, you can answer those. Okay, so let me move on to this different problem. That's what I was trying to. Okay, so the lead poisoning problem. And this is a simpler intervention. Right? So in this case, the interventions are remove the lead from the home. If you remove the lead, then there's no way this kid can get lead poisoning, but we're doing it too late because we're waiting for the kids to first get poisoned. And so in this case, the nice thing was that the health department we were working with in Chicago realized that was a problem. They just said, what can we do about it? So very similar to the police case, they came to us with, hey, we have all this data that we've been capturing about all the blood tests and all the children in Chicago, and then we have data on all the homes that we've tested, the lead levels. So can we predict which kids are likely to be lead poisoned before they get poisoned? And then we can send inspectors there before that and fix the home if that happens. And it turns out, yeah, you can. And so again, we took all this data and built a model which predicted around sort of at birth time, or basically what happens is kids start falling around 12 months, so 10 to 12 months, and that's when the high risk time begins for these kids. So if you can predict before that time, then you can check for lead hazards in the home and remove them before they get exposed to it. And so it turns out right now we can, the current numbers we have, we can do about 25-ish% accuracy. So if you take the top, so most health departments have a limited number of resources to do this work, so they can't inspect every home. Otherwise, we would just go to every home and fix every home. That's too expensive, never going to happen. So how do we prioritize the inspections we can do? Given the inspections we can do right now, in Chicago, it's about a few thousand inspections a month. When we look at that, if we rank all the kids in Chicago and look at, if they could only inspect these few thousand, we can get about 25% of them. And in this case, the baseline is about 4%, 3%. So it's about 7-8x more accurate and infinitely more accurate than what they're doing now, because today they use a completely reactive thing, so they're not saving any kids. Well, they are saving some future kids. But even random would be better at saving current kids than what they're doing today. So right now, that process, the initial modeling and machine learning stuff, took a few months. And then it took about 2 years for us to get to the point where we could run an actual field trial experiment with the city, where they would send inspectors using the rank list from the model and versus the way they're doing it versus random to see how well. And that's going on right now. One of the things that's going on also is that they're working on designing a city law that forces them to do inspections prioritized by some sort of a predictive rank list. So that's hopefully progress for them. And there's some more details in the paper below. I'll skip this one for now. Actually, I'll mention that quickly. So we've done a bunch of work with different schools in the States around, again, the problem of initial targeting of these programs. And the big thing we found is that, of course, teachers and principals and everybody in the school knows which students are at risk. What they don't have access to is,
Sorry, forgive me, I'm behind you as you finish the next topic. I was to ask a question which is somewhat relevant to the next topic too. There's some domain knowledge. You would know that the likely places for lead would be on tract houses or would be on places built at the same time. So the likelihood is that the neighbouring house is likely to be similarly affected. To what extent do you require, and how do you collect domain expertise to influence and affect the base size of this?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and often sort of the question is, in pretty much all these problems, but let's take lead, there are domain experts who understand what kinds of homes are likely to have lead. If they found lead in one home, homes nearby probably also have lead. So how do you incorporate that into, how do you sort of elicit that and how do you incorporate that? And so every project that I'm talking about is sort of done very much in collaboration with the domain experts. Right? So we're not getting the data and sitting in a corner and doing something and then throwing it back to them. It's very much we're sitting with them, going back and forth and coming up with what things go into this. What data, but then after the data, what are the different features and characteristics of a home that should go in there? What are the different priors we should be putting in there based on what they know? And what it turns out that, the baseline is really that. Right? The baseline is what would a domain expert do, and how much can this do better than that? And it turns out that it's relatively easy to figure out which homes have that came in there. They're built before 1978, and they haven't been fixed up. But the harder part is to figure out if there is a kid in that home who is likely to get exposed to lead and get lead poisoning. And that often is a function of the behavior of the kid, the parents. If they wash the kid's hands very often, then it's not a problem. If they sweep the floor a lot, then it's not a problem. You cannot get all that data, but when you put all that stuff into the model, it's able to sort of tune that and get a list that is better than what the domain experts can figure out. Because every home, if you look at all these baselines, you can do sort of, some sort of a heat map of given where that has been before, what would be and that's what most people have done before, is large, I'm saying large, but let's say block level predictions, and they're not as accurate because the interventions in all these cases are individual. Like you're not making group level interventions. You have to go to each home. So if you've got a building with 100 homes, you cannot go to all of them and fix all the homes. You have to pick which ones are likely to have lead poison. So in all of these cases, what we do is we work with the domain experts to figure out what they think are the characteristics we should put into these models, and we put a bunch more. So we'll put a few hundred features into all our models, but then we make sure that we put in more data. And then we run some baselines to compare not just if this does better, but if it finds different types of homes, does it rank them differently? And often the things that domain experts come up with, I think the biggest challenge is that they're not ranked. They're often, they're some sort of, they're just binaries, at risk or not at risk, and then you can prioritize those things. So even if you're using the same inputs, you can now come up with a prioritized list that helps you take action because you've always got limited resources.
As a follow-up, a data science follow-up to that question, as you build these with input from domain expertise, is there any kind of typology you can refer to say it doesn't matter if you have too many false positives, does it too many false negatives as we begin to treat the model, or is this case by case?
Yeah, so I think for each type of problem you can, and I'll talk a little bit about that, for each type of problem you sort of want to give the policy expert a menu. If you intervene with X percent, so in all of these things, it's sort of this, the output is some sort of a rank list. And what you want to tell the policy experts typically is, depending on what your intervention capacity is, if you intervene with the top 5% homes, children, police officers, you're going to get some precision. Right? So what percentage of those interventions are actually going to go on to be positives, and some recall, which is what we want to catch. And for different types of models, you sort of give them that menu. And that's sort of the best you can do, right? You sort of give the shape of that curve and say, okay, you decide where your intervention capacity is, and then you get more. But that's for each type of these problems, that's what we end up giving people is this menu of you decide how much you can intervene with. The problem is you want to know that capacity because you want to optimize your models for that capacity, right? If it's 5% versus 10%, you could have two different models that are optimized for 5 and 10, and 1 and 3. So, and one is optimized for precision, the one is optimized for different metrics that you care about. Because for each person, you might have your utility function may not be equal across people or across homes or across, because one of them might have some network effects that if you stop this from happening, then you're going to stop a lot of things happening later on. So there are a lot of cases where it's a little, where all we're doing is kind of give a menu options to the policy makers and then they can decide.
So last one, from a public policy point of view, presumably those costs, all the different departments often, how do you reconcile that? I mean, the fact that you have to send too many people out, but the cost of sending too many people out and benefiting designing too many false positives, actually the benefit is that the keeps them sick and doesn't put the health service then for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I don't think we're there. I've had a lot of those conversations. I don't think we're anywhere close. I think right now we're just trying to get them to care about their own department. But you're right. I mean, one of the conversations we've had is the school should be giving you money to fix these homes because if the kids are not that poisoned when they get into school, their grades are going to be higher. The school graduation rate goes up. So you should take their money from schools and give it to this program. Because it makes perfect sense. It's going to increase your numbers. Of course, that doesn't go anywhere. But I've had this conversation. I don't think we're anywhere close to that, but hopefully soon. Okay, so very quickly for this one, what we've actually found is the same story. One of the interesting things we found is that if you sort of compare the students who are at risk, we can do a little bit better compared to 10-20% better at identifying kids who are at risk of dropping out of school compared to what the teachers already know. But the more important thing is we can do that 4 years earlier. Right? So we can do that in year 7 instead of year 10, and you'll have 3 extra years to intervene and figure out interventions that work and don't work. So some of these things may not be more accurate, but they are early enough that you have more time. So that's another dimension of performance. If you think about it, it's not just how accurate it is, but also how much more time does it give people to intervene. This I will skip. I'm pretty much out of time, so I'll put these somewhere better in matching with social programs. This is interesting, some work we've just started, and this is one of the first sort of attempts we've had to do this multi-system thing. So the hypothesis here is that what we can find in the data that most people who end up in jail over and over and over again for long periods of time, they often have earlier interactions with other systems, emergency rooms and hospitals, mental health facilities, homeless shelters, and the hypothesis, but if you sort of go other way, only 0.000 something % of people who go to an emergency room are going to go to jail in the next few years. So our hypothesis is that if we can hopefully identify these people early on, and we can provide that information to the caseworkers in those facilities so that they can treat them for the problem they're there for, but they can also work with them, continue to work with them over the next some months to make sure they don't get in trouble. We can prevent them from going into jail for that period of time. Now, at this point, it's really a hypothesis, but this is really coming from the people who work in those. This is not coming from the data side. The data, all we can see in the data is that it can be predicted. But then the main question becomes, can those people think they can come up with interventions to try to prevent them from getting in there? And from the early results we found, we're basically finding that, so this is that menu I was talking about, is this is your prioritized list. This is the highest risk person, and then you can go down to the lowest risk person. This is work with one state in the States, Kansas, and one county in there. And so what we're finding is that if we take the top of a couple of hundreds, about 250 people we think who are interacting with the mental health system today, if we predict who's going to go to jail in the next year, and we take our top 200 predictions, 50% of them do end up going to jail in the next year. So that's encouraging that we can identify them. But the more important thing is that all of these people in that next year, we're going to combine and spend about 7,000 days in jail. And so this is some work we just started a few months ago, and it's sort of part of a larger national effort to try to fix the criminal justice system. And the encouraging thing here is that all those states are trying to set up these programs now. They're trying to come up with ways to combine data across all of these different systems, so mental health, homelessness, emergency rooms, criminal justice, police, to try to find out how we can intervene. Because in this case, for us, it's obviously about the people who are being blamed and who are going to jail, but for a lot of those states, it's also about money, because they're spending a lot of money on keeping these people in jail. It's both financially the right thing to do, but also it's the right thing to do.
So if an intervention were perfect,
100% effective, I would say that. But we have no idea at this point. One thing we did find was these people here, when we looked at what was common among these people, one of the things that was funny, the students are working with accidentally left out last time they were in touch with somebody from the system. They accidentally forgot to include that variable in the model. And then as we looked at that, it turns out that they had been out of touch with the system for a long time. So there was some indication that if they had been contacted more often, something could have changed. Right now we don't have the causal link here, but that's the trial. So in all these projects where there is some sort of a trial that happens after these things, and a short experiment with RCT that then tests how effective these interventions are.
I'm just interested whether you're doing any work, I know you've been talking about sort of ranking everybody, kind of just cut-offs. But to me, there's a slightly more interesting, slightly more interesting question about whether you actually can segment these populations. Because presumably some of the characteristics are going to cluster, and therefore you might tailor the program, not just target the program.
Right.
So, for
That's right.
instance, the example you gave of the police and possibly with this, there's probably one group that are the bad apples and you discipline them, and there's the other group that are highly stressed because they've been out through a lot of domestic abuse, and you might kind of tailor which. Are you doing
Yeah, so I'm not talking about that, but that's so there are kind of three levels of things. There's one level which is just this ranked list, prioritize who you should intervene with. There's a second level of things which is I have these existing interventions. Can I put a ranked list within each intervention? Right? So for each intervention you want to have a ranked list. And the third one is, which we haven't done, so we're doing one, we're doing two. We're not doing three because it requires two to be done really well first. See which people, when given those interventions, none of them work for them. So which new interventions do you need to design in order to get the people you're missing? We're talking about with all these different people about the third one, but it requires the second one to be done. So we're right now, because one is not that useful, because you're not gonna, I mean, it is useful, but two is what is operationally useful, is I've got this program, who do I put in there? I've got this after school program for academics, I've got these programs for counseling, so two is what practically happens. But I'm only talking about it as one list just because it's easier to talk about it in
There's also a fourth possibility, which is you actually look at whether particular characteristics are clustering, and whether there are groups of people for whom there is no
Happy to.
program. That you can imagine
Right.
all these different things that are.
Right. I mean, the challenge is that in all these cases, those are all hypotheses as opposed to, because we only have observational data, so we can only do so much causal inference. So we can't really tell you, we're hoping to find proxies of things, but we don't, in some cases we can do some of these cases we're doing some other work that gets to that causal inference, but we're basically saying here are the predictors, and we're hoping that those predictors cluster into something that somebody can say, oh yeah, I can see what's happening here. But we don't really know. So I don't want to claim more than what we're doing on these things, even to those people, because I want them to learn how to do this as opposed to kind of giving them a black box like this, that's what this is doing. But absolutely right, I think that's the right approach. So, let me just close that too. Tried. Yeah.
What about the jail or crime commitment? You first of all, some precaution of your symptom, why are you the assumption, you assume something. But how did you find these kind of assumptions? It's debating to the jail or the crime commitment. Maybe there are several other symptoms or precaution of activity. How do you find the fix? Maybe they are mostly related to the fix. It's not related.
Yeah, I mean, I think all we can do in that assumption is, and I'm going to come back. I guess I don't have time to come back to that, but so we're trying to figure out different ways of interpreting the models we're building, and we're hoping that interpretation leads to, when you're showing that interpretation to the expert, they can see what's connected and what's not connected. Right? So there are different. We don't actually know if there are any causal linkages between a lot of things. But the assumption what we're hoping is that if something is not predictive, then it's probably not causal, but other way around, we don't know. So we're at least starting with saying, here are all the things that are possible, here are things that are predictive. Let's see if we can use those to target interventions, and then come up with new interventions. But we don't really have at least right now without experiments, we don't have a good way of validating some of those linkages. We know that they are on historical data over time that they are predictive, but that's sort of the best we can do at this point without running actual experiments. Okay, so I'll skip through a bunch of these examples. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about, which I'm not going to talk about, is sort of, there are a lot of these examples that you know, it's all this stuff that I've talked about. Why isn't more of this work happening? Right? And the hypothesis that we had before starting this, there are three reasons why it's not happening in government and NGOs today. One is that they don't really have people who can do this work. Right? A lot of people here are probably capable of doing this work, but you know, other places are a lot more attractive to do this work. Second is that are there a lot of people who are capable of it? It's just they don't. One, they don't know the problems that they can do something where they don't have access to the problems, they don't have access to data, and they don't have access to organizations who can work with them to solve these problems. Second is that all these organizations don't really have, they don't know what to do. So you go to a government agency and say, how can I help you with data? Maybe merge all these spreadsheets together. We've got these three databases with like, can we put them in one place? Can you make a map? Can you really like maps? So that's the second problem. The third one is that they don't really have tools, right? So if you're a large telco, you want to figure out, you know, which of your customers are not going to be customers within 1 year. You go buy a software for that. If you're a large retailer and you want to figure out the best pricing, you buy software for that. If you're a bank and you want to figure out, you know, credit scoring, you buy software for that. If you're a government agency or a nonprofit and you want to figure out, you know, which kids are at risk of lead poisoning or HIV or asthma, I guess you go buy SAS, SPSS, hopefully not STEaPP, but you don't have anything, you don't have any software, you sort of start from scratch every time. And so what we need is sort of, one is education on students to sort of explore, two kinds of education. One is to how to do actual practical machine learning, data science, whatever we want to call it, but trying to solve the entire problem as opposed to the siloed problems we solve in, you know, machine learning solves. God gives you a matrix, you do something with that matrix, you just our C curve, and you're done, right? And so what happens before the matrix and what happens after the curve, we don't teach much of that most of the time. So how do you sort of teach students to do solve the entire problem, but in a practical way, but also how do you talk about the problems that are out there? That's sort of really critical. The second thing is, how do you create these examples? And that requires sort of actual collaboration, you know, where you have to work on real projects with real data, with real organizations, and that's a lot of work. And they don't trust, typically, academics to really come through with something. They spend a lot of time, and they know that doesn't fit my research interests, so they both get disappointed. So how do you get that done? And then the third thing is, how do you build, as a result, these things, software, and actually reusable software and data that can be reused by these organizations. And so the examples I was giving is sort of they're done through kind of doing all these things together. So a lot of them, as John mentioned, were the projects that were started as part of a program. Actually, I'll talk about a few different things we're doing at the university. One is we've got this joint computer science public policy graduate program that's getting students who are interested in policy, but want to learn a lot more about computational and data analysis methods and tools. Other universities will start doing this. So CMU has had a program for several years, a joint machine learning public policy PhD program. They also have a master's program. And I think that's a few of the universities are also getting there. So there is some interest happening right now. A lot of these projects started in the program that I run called Data Science for Social Good, where we get people from computer science, math, physics, statistics, economics, sociology, public policy, bring them together for the summer, about 40 students, and they spend 3 to 4 summer working on one of these projects that I talked about. In 3 months, you can't really solve the problem, but it helps us do very quick proof of concepts to see what's possible, what's feasible. That then leads to more validation and longer term work and implementation. And what we find is sort of we need a bunch of different skills, right? So we're sort of often, we either teach these things or we teach these things, or we teach these things. And what we're finding is we sort of need people with all of these things, right? So all of this is important, but all this is useless if you can't define the right problem. And we often don't really teach people how to do that. We hope that they stumble upon a good way of learning how to design a good problem, and 5 years later, after you know, in their secondary thesis, they would think about how to do that well. And then, you know, if there's teach them the communication, there's a lot of legal and ethical things they need to know about, and then how to test and validate all this work, how to design an actual experiment. This is not on a computer. It involves real people. That might take years. So we're sort of learning all that as we teach students how to do this work. And then there's sort of more research gaps that exist in these two, right? Traditionally, a lot of this work hasn't spent too much time on causal inference or even behavior change. There's some work there, but we sort of, in this world, are very good at predicting things and watching them happen. And then a lot of this world is changing things, but not really using data before they've changed things. So maybe you can first use data and then change things and then see what. And then there's a lot of work happening right now at this intersection. I didn't mention that later if you have questions. I'll skip some of these templates. And there's a lot of really interesting things around, especially around interpretability of these things. How do you interpret them? How do you make them transparent, but still not gameable? And then how do you make sure that, you know, we're, unlike Google or Facebook showing us ads, if they get something wrong, shows the wrong ad, it doesn't really hurt too many people, at least not too much. But in all of these cases, we're dealing with people's lives and very critical issues. So we want to make sure we're not doing things that are unethical, unfair, knowingly or unknowingly. So a lot of the challenges, you know, we deal with is the data that we're getting is historically biased. It's as a result of some human process that was, whether it's investigation from police, whether it's existing interventions, whether it's existing targeting. And so how do you make sure that that biased data doesn't lead to exaggerating and propagating that bias, not just in the kinds of decisions you're making about people, but also in sort of in the machine learning and data science world, we often evaluate these models with how accurate they are. What happens, so if something is 89% accurate, the 11% that it's wrong on, who are those people? Is it uniformly distributed across all types of people? Or are you being wrong about certain types of people and unfairly penalizing them because your model doesn't have enough data about them? So there's a lot of questions there that we're trying to think through and come up with almost algorithmic ways of, one, auditing any model that gets built for these fairness concerns, and then correcting for those biases, whether or not there's a trade-off between performance, accuracy, and bias. It's not clear. For some problems there is a trade-off, for some problems there isn't. There are several model classes that are equally accurate, but one of them is less unfair. So right now we just don't measure those as a standard thing, so that's what we're trying to learn is how to do that more effectively.
Excuse me, have you had any thoughts about the risk of litigation from that 11% for whom the model was wrong?
So we actually had a conversation with a few lawyers about how do you change law when. So one of the things we're talking about is, so one specific conversation we had was sort of probable cause. Right now, what does probable cause mean? Is there actual probability threshold? There isn't. Should there be? Probably. How do you come up with that threshold? How do you validate that threshold? So that was a very specific conversation, but then we've talked to people about, you know, when, right now people are a lot more forgiving if humans make mistakes. Because, oh, they're human. The machines are supposed to be much better than that. So, you know, when the Tesla car, autopilot versus a human, very much worse. But we don't forgive machines for things. So I think right now I don't think the structure exists for litigation, but it should. But that also means that humans have to figure out how to, again, it's a policy question, right? Can I figure out what my checks and audits are on these types of models? And then if you want to be fair to everyone, then you have to decide to be unfair to certain people, right? If there's going to be a trade-off, so if the errors have to be equal across all types of people, then for certain people you are knowingly getting them wrong to get this right. And you know, I'm not the right person to make that decision, but we're hoping that we can at least provide that menu, that information to people who have to make a policy. And then each policymaker kind of has to make a very transparent public policy that decides here's what I'm drawing the line, and here are the pros and cons, and here are the trade-offs, which is going to be an uncomfortable world for them because it requires them to do very public policy. So I don't really have an answer because at least when we talk to people on the legal side who are dealing with these types of questions, I don't know. So they haven't quite figured it out. I mean, my thought was that there must be some, even with human decisions, you should be doing that. And it does happen where a human gets it wrong, you know, we can be sued. But what if a human, in this case, who gets sued? Is it the algorithm developer? Is it the software developer? Is it still the policymaker? If they have more information, if they choose to ignore it? I don't know.
So my observation is that a lot of defense with machine learning stuff tends to be very abstract. You can figure out what's going on. So I wonder whether you find yourself in a situation where you can predict something, maybe even with really good accuracy, but it's hard to put together a human understandable narrative. And then what happens?
Yeah, so that's something we're dealing. The question is, when you're using very, very deep things, you might not be able to explain what's happening and what do you do. And I think the premise of all of this is that you're giving humans more information so that they can make a better decision. If you're not helping them make that decision, then that algorithm is not very useful. Because one, even if it may be correct, you still, it's too risky in some cases, right? At the same time, if you don't take action on that, somebody might sue you. If you knew I was going to get sick and you didn't do anything because you couldn't understand this algorithm. So what we try to do is, one of the things we've been working on is how do you, and there's some work going on there, is how do you almost do sort of model agnostic interpretations and explanations, where the model is going to be complicated, but can you explain it in a way that's sort of more uniform? So for example, very simple things like class status. You take the at-risk population that you've predicted, take everybody, and then just describe, okay, the high risk are 80% male, 20% female, no income with fear. And so describe it in a way that people at least understand it, and instead of trying to do much more complicated things. But right now, sort of, again, we're too early to really know whether that. So that certainly does make people comfortable. The question is, so a lot of people say, well, logistic regression is really easy to understand. I haven't met many people who understand odds ratios really well. So I don't think most policymakers know what odds ratios are. So even logistic regression is not a good way of explaining it, especially the way in machine learning you use it as you throw in, again, a few under features, right? So once you've done that, it's not 5 carefully stacked features, your coefficients don't make much sense anymore, so it's not the same. You could do lots of things with, you sort of go more and more complex. The good thing in a lot of these problems, we haven't really used any of the deep learning things because we just don't have enough data. We don't have that huge amounts of data in these cases because it's fairly limited. So the typical models we run through are the usual, pre-deep learning models. But yeah.
Is there an ethical parallel of medicine in the sense that a doctor can be sued for not being medicine, can be sued for being wrong medicine, but he can't be sued for being the right medicine, he doesn't have to work for you?
I would like that. I think we have a responsibility, right? If we're giving tools to people to make decisions, then we should be held accountable for those tools. You can't just say, hey, it's a tool, you can use it for good or bad, you can make wrong decisions. So I think the question is, I would like for there to be something which holds people accountable. At the same time, I also want the same thing to forward on to policymakers, where given that input, they need to make a very transparent policy, also put it on GitHub, where here's the threshold I'm choosing for action and for intervention, so that everybody in the chain is. But I think it needs to be more transparent than today. Yeah.
We had actually just a couple of points. Firstly, related to the legal points, we had a whole session on liability and machine learning last week. A symposium about machine learning law at Cambridge. Cambridge Queen Mary. Lawyers with computer science to the point where it works. It might not be accessible for everybody, but it definitely isn't a case where we suddenly need new law. In fact, it's really brought out by discussion between groups. And secondly, as a simple question, have you ever used operationally in one of these projects any of the many fairness web machine learning tools that have been developed?
I mean, there aren't any that are actually operational that work accurately and that actually give you. I mean, there's some very, very preliminary things that are happening, you know, ranging from some that work a few years ago to more recent. You know, very. I mean, if you look at fairness in machine learning, that's 2-3 years ago people started thinking about that problem in actual detail, and none of those systems are. Fairness on actual problems, real data with real organizations. I haven't seen anything done. There's a literature. Yeah.
Or you mean empirical literature?
But that's what I mean.
I was asking.
Yeah. So there isn't any. There aren't any methods that actually scale to practical problems right now. At least that's what we're finding. And if you know of any, I would love to take that. And we've got lots of problems we're trying to develop some of these things. But any existing literature I've seen, it's not really. You can do sort of basically, you take your protected classes and see what the distribution looks like on those protected classes. To correct for those is not trivial. You can sort of add a penalty term for that and see how your model changes, but that's really not the right way of dealing with it. So I haven't seen any good work. The workshops that happen next one in November. So if you do have any suggestions, I'm happy to work on that.
I do a lot of work with pupil level exam results data and attendance data. There's a small but vulnerable campaign that would like researchers not to have access to that pupil level data. Just wondered, how much of your time do you spend having to advocate for data to be available to
A lot. Well, so it depends. So I take a different path. I'm not, so this data is not public. I will not make it public. And I have to sort of give up my personal research agenda and really go to them and say, oh, they want to help you solve your problems. So they have to trust me. And that takes a while. But most, what they're afraid of typically, so there's sort of individual organizations. They're afraid of is you're going to get their data and you find something bad, you're going to make it public, or another addition, you're going to do something that's not really helping them. It's sort of proving some sort of research hypothesis you have. So I think there's sort of this, if you are a researcher who wants to find these things, you sort of pay, I don't think of it as paying a price, but I think some people may say there's an overhead, which means I have to do something useful for them. And if I do that, it gives me the flexibility to then try new things, and they're much more open to it. I do spend a lot of my time talking to them about why we need all the data. Yes, we need individual level data. Yes, it needs to be digital, and be anonymized.
is that fairly common reaction?
I think they're all afraid of. So there is an organization, and there are the people who own the data in that organization, and some of them are lazy, and so they don't want to do all the work to get all the data, and some of them are just afraid of what if something gets leaked, something gets. So we've done things where we do hash, because a lot of these projects we have to match people across databases, we can't really get anonymized data. And so we do a lot of different things where we hash it on their side, and then we say, okay, it's a one-way hash. So we can recover the police officer ID when we give it back to you. You can do the hash again, and then we can match it on their side. We can match it on our side, but when you do hashes, you sort of lose the similarity across different things. So we have to come up with different ways of dealing with it. But they all sort of, the first reaction for a lot of people is, oh, we're not allowed to. And then after a few conversations and telling them we've done this with this school, this police department, this hospital, this public health, they start getting more and more comfortable. And then most of the times, eventually, if we do work with them, it's been given. They can't really do anything. One of the things we've been trying to do is sort of also compare what if you had different levels of data, aggregation, how much does it hurt you at doing this work, so we can then go back to them what the one organization can say. If you only give us this, here's what you're going to get. And that's another approach of telling them how valuable is that individual, apart from just the, if your interventions are individual, not giving individual data isn't very useful to you as an organization, as a school, or as a government agency. But it is meaningful. Pretty much, I'd say a third of the conversations I have with these agencies, it starts with some legal acronym that doesn't allow me to give you data.
Just following on from that, I mean, this is the future in some part, isn't it?
Some country and some
in a way, some policy people will say, yes, we accept this, we'll take it on board. Have you seen instances of Luddites where they say, this is a bit like turkeys vote for Christmas, because if you can create an algorithm that prioritises resources, you're sort of saying, you're a policy maker, all that black box that you provided, we don't need anymore.
I think we'll be dead soon, hopefully. Unreal. No, I mean, nobody, if you actually have a conversation with people, they're doing all of this, they're just doing it as best as a human can, with limited information. And so I think that's eventually, nothing is really a black box. Right? They might perceive it as that, but eventually so I think it hasn't been a big, it takes time and it takes sort of convincing them, but the more robust so for an example that I did give was we were working with a city in New York State on water pipes breaking. It's a problem that the city had, not a huge problem, but in that city they had sort of every other day a pipe would break on average. And they, as like most cities, they're reactive. They go in and they see, break comes in, they go in, dig the street, fix the pipe, redo the street. And so we spent the summer kind of built the model. We just last 2 weeks ago we gave them a list. And they came back shocked. Like, wait, the top 5, you predicted 2 of them just broke 2 weeks ago. And off the top, 50, 10 of them have broken, another 8 you were off by a block. And I mean, it was better than it was luck. It was really tough. We couldn't have been that good. But it's happened to be so a lot of it is the way we're kind of validating them is really making sure that we give them things that there was no way we would have known. We didn't and we had this data, and we didn't have this data. So you have to make sure that you're doing sort of robust validation. And then also, the other danger is that I sort of run into the other issue of you have people on both sides, people who don't trust anything, and other people who just take it blindly. And these things aren't good enough right now without an actual experiment to put all your policy efforts into. So I kind of spend my time both sort of getting people to use these things at the same time, telling them, don't trust it blindly. If you run this test, it doesn't. But you said it worked. I guess I know it. I said that. But we still have to run the validation. We can't just deploy it because this model said we'll do these things. So I think you have to kind of play both sides of it to make sure that people don't estimate the effectiveness of these things.
I thought that was a very inspiring talk. I think I'm the only person here with no probably a data scientist. I've got a problem. So I would like some collaboration. But I was wondering if you had any examples of what you've done where it's hypothesis generation driven. Because I have a big problem, but I don't have a hypothesis, it's the massive NHS data, microdata, for about 2 million people over 10 years, and it's older people, and most of them have 2 or more diseases. So having this multidimensional, huge range of diseases, there are 10,000 diseases, perhaps selected 30 of the chronic ones. And the thing is, as you get older, you acquire more and more, and it becomes chaotic. There is no etiological link any longer. But in there's some patterns that must emerge. And I would like to use some sort of machine learning or data science to solve my chaotic problems. So I was just wondering whether you've done something in the past, or UCL is data science, people are willing to collaborate on something like this.
Yeah, no, I think there are many people here, and I think that's the right, like one of the, I guess I'll go back into, so I have these problem templates that most of the projects we end up doing in these things, they fall into one of these templates, and the third one is sort of this, is that, and so I call it kind of a hypothesis, you're sort of generating causal hypotheses, where you've got, could be one of 20,000 things, you don't know which one. The data isn't going to tell you which one, but it can take from those 20,000 and narrow it down to 20 that are possibly, and then you can go and test those things much more carefully. So, yeah, I think I'm assuming John will be happy to talk to you afterwards. Yeah.
Maybe any one question?
Yes, sorry, just I think coming on from the lady's question and going back to your statement about weakness in problem statement. Do you have from your experience any kind of suggestion what a good problem generation hypothesis development sort of body of knowledge could contain, and are there any resources out there that you could point us towards so that we can increase our capability in this area?
Yeah, so I do have some things, just because we've run a couple of workshops on teaching students how to do that. So we've done a whole day-long workshop where all they do is sort of scope problems, where they spend all day and they come up with a problem scope. And I think the key in there, the thing at least that you have to be careful about is who are you, the person who's solving it, who you're solving it for, right? So if it's a social science research question, that's different than a policy intervention question. So the lead poisoning case, for example, a lot of the problems I've talked about, my problem formulation is very much an operational problem. I'm a government agency and I have to take action. How do I prioritize? How do I figure out which ones to take actions on? If I'm a social science researcher or a medical researcher, I might be trying to figure out the causal structure of that problem. So those different, you might want to use different approaches for that, but I can email me and send you some resources on that.
Well, I think we've certainly had a good set of questions, taken Rayid over the top by quite a way. So I'd like to draw to a finish here. Thank Rayid, first of all, very much for a hugely interesting talk, obviously very stimulating for the audience. And let's give him a round of applause.